Alrighty, we are live. I will wait a couple of seconds, maybe a couple of minutes until more people come online, just to let people come in. Okay, we see some viewers coming in. Great. Alrighty, let's get started. So, all right, more people are coming in. Hello, and thank you to everybody who has joined us today and to the NGO Commission on the Status of Women Forum for organizing this and for allowing us to have a platform to have this critical discussion. My name is Sabrina Sohail. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Communications at Campaign for Uyghurs, and I will be your moderator for today. As we speak, the Uyghur people are facing the most organized and modern genocide that this world has ever seen. And Uyghur women are deliberately targeted, facing unimaginable atrocities. At Campaign for Uyghurs, our mission is to hold the Chinese government accountable for the act of genocide, and we focus on empowering Uyghur women and youth. I'm honored to be joined by this group of incredible women, Luann Sabatier, Anne Bashem, Rishana Abbas, and Soraya Kashgari, who will be speaking on the realities and the intricacies of what is going on within the region, what is going on with the diaspora community, and their incredible work and insights. The goal of this conversation is to learn about what more can be done to hold the Chinese government accountable and how we can fortify the institutions that exist to uplift Uyghur women. We will begin with remarks and insights from each panelist to set the groundwork for our conversation, and then dive into a panel discussion. And for everybody who is watching, if you had questions, please add them to the comment section on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and I will be sure to incorporate them. So I'd like to start with Rishana Abbas, Executive Director of Campaign for Uyghurs, and she will be setting the stage of the reality on the ground. A brief bio, Rishan is a Uyghur American activist who has dedicated her life to championing the rights of the Uyghur people. In response to Beijing's escalating genocidal actions against the Uyghurs in 2017, she founded Campaign for Uyghurs. She frequently engages with global lawmakers and testifies before US Senate and Congress to shed light on the Chinese regime's genocide and crimes against humanity. She works constantly to bring awareness to the Uyghur cause and deliver public addresses at diverse venues and with diverse audiences, including Holocaust museums, universities, women's organizations, and interfaith societies. Rashan currently is a member of the Interparliamentary Task Force on Human Trafficking and is the advisory board chair of the Axel Springer Freedom Foundation. And Rashan, I'd like to give the floor to you now to speak.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Sabrina, for the introduction. The crimes against my people in our homeland and the thing of the Uyghur women are so many, but I will try to just summarize them here. Under the guise of so-called national security, the CC is using surveillance, and military dominance in the Uyghur region, and it's conducting a full-fledged active genocide against the Uyghur people. The entire population is oppressed, arbitrarily detained, indoctrinated, subject to forced labor, biometric data harvesting, and unspeakable torture. Open source data testimonies and the leaked documents have shown that Uyghur women are being subjected to forced sterilization, forced abortions, family separation, forced marriages to Han Chinese men, and intrusive surveillance. Basically, the bodies of the Uyghur women are the true battleground of this genocide. If an Uyghur woman doesn't comply with such a genocidal policies, she's arrested as being an extremist. With these policies, the government can increase or decrease population growth of any group at will. Dr. Adrian Zhang stated it is akin to opening or closing a faucet. The Chinese government's own state media reported that 1.1 million Han Chinese cadres, mostly male, have been deployed into the Uyghur homes to supervise and monitor their daily lives, while most of the Uyghur men are in detention, in prison, or sent to forced labor facilities. Uyghur women are subject to sexual abuse inside of their own homes. Can you imagine the place that's supposed to be a safest to you, your own home, becoming a hell worse than a prison? The world has never seen this type of state-sponsored terror. China claims through propaganda and the official reports that the government is raising the socio-economic status of the Uyghur women and empowering them. This is a lie. Female business owners have disappeared into camps. Women, especially those with a traditional agricultural background, are coerced into selling their land, moved from farm life and being with their families. They're forcibly sent to make consumer goods. These so-called poverty alleviation programs are taking wealth away from Uyghur women while separating children from their mothers, from their families. Female educators and religious leaders are arrested. The Uyghur economy is completely destroyed, and the families are detained or fined into poverty for having too many children. Our thought leaders and the Uyghur intellectuals, such as Dr. Raila Dawood, have been imprisoned. My own sister, Gulshan Abbas, a retired medical doctor, devoted to healthcare, and the caring, kind grandma, has been detained for the past 5.5 years. And she was taken due to my advocacy in the United States as an act of CCP's transnational repression. These precious people, along with millions, face re-education, forced labor, and indignity. We know too well that what happens when the world sits silent, but now we are all witnesses. We know that multinational corporations are using Uyghur slave labor, at least 4 of them with ties to the Holocaust. Today we know where this leads, and we need to do something. The UN champions the Beijing platform for action was emphasizing on the bringing women out of poverty and strengthening reproductive rights. However, this year, the CSW Forum and the priorities must explicitly include the rights to have children and right to parent children under dignified conditions free from the violence. Wanting to raise children is not backwards. It's a basic human rights. Forcing women to marry outside of their culture and religion is not progressive. It's a violation of human rights. Being an Uyghur woman is not a crime. It's a survival rights of the Uyghurs. If the genocidal policies against my people are not addressed today, our world will see lineage after lineage die with the same methods of oppression tomorrow. And it's up to us to stop this from becoming a reality. If we do not raise our voices and speak out, then the only voice left tomorrow will be one of regret. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashawn, for that harrowing account of what is happening in the region. And I'd like to now move to Soraya, who will be speaking about the reality of what Uyghur women are facing in the diaspora. A short bio. Soraya is a passionate advocate for Uyghur language and culture in the diaspora community. Her educational journey began in her hometown of Gulja City. She later went on to earn a bachelor's degree in history from Shanghai Normal University and worked as an editor at the Xinjiang Publishing House in Urumqi. She later pursued a master's degree in general Turkic history at Ankara University. Arriving in the US in 1999, she quickly became involved in supporting newly arrived Uyghur immigrants. In 2017, she founded AnaCare and Education, a school focusing on Uyghur language, history, arts, and culture. Under her leadership, the school has grown to serve over 100 students. She continues to promote Uyghur language education and cultural preservation on a global scale. Raya, take the floor.
Thank you. Firstly, I would like to thank you, Campaign for Uyghurs, for giving me this opportunity to able to speak at this painful of successful panel full of independent, successful women. As the founder, I'm honored to be able to speak for AnaCare Education. I would also like to give a huge thanks for Irada, my co-founder, daughter, and partner for all the great help she has provided over the years, since it first opened in 2017. For those who are not familiar, AnaCare Education is an Uyghur language school based in Northern Virginia, where we teach the Uyghur language, but also provide opportunities for the students to be more intimate with their culture and have a better understanding of where they came from and who they are. Mainly targeting the Uyghur youth located in the DMV area, we offer numerous number of courses outside of the language classes, such as history, Islamic etiquette, sports, and arts. The mother in the Uyghur culture is highly regarded and respected. In charge of educating and taking care of the children and also being a leader in the household and community, I think this shows as a Uyghur highly respected woman in our culture, in the house and the workplace. With the school mainly being run by women, this demonstrates the impact Uyghur women have and not just their families, but all the other families in the Uyghur diaspora. We believe that much of cultural preservation starts at the mother, and that is why we have made sure to show that importance in the name of our school. With everything that has been going in our homeland, now more than ever, an Uyghur language school is needed. The start and the end of the culture begins with its mother tongue. Without that, a culture can easily be lost. And that is why I have opened the AnaCare Education as a way for my culture to remain alive and vibrant when others would like to see it disappear. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, Soraya, for sharing more about the incredible work that you're doing at AnaCare in the safeguarding the culture and tradition. I'd like to move forward and hear from Luann Sabatier. Luann is the principal of Sabatier Consulting, a global media consultancy garnering an impressive clientele list, including organizations such as the International Monetary Fund, the OECD, National Geographic, the Federal Reserve Bank, World Vision, Save the Children, and the US Marine Corps. For the past decade, she has also served as a communications director at 21 Wilberforce, a Christian human rights NGO. She is a co-founder at Forb Women Alliance, the publisher of the International Religious Freedom Scorecard, and co-author of the 25th retrospective of the International Religious Freedom Act. And Lu Ann is going to speak on the countless trends that she has seen facing Uyghurs and other groups facing active genocide and atrocities. Lu Ann, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think we have some slides we're bringing up, and hope you'll bear with me as I will be saying next slide. Women at the table. What you see on the screen right now is For Women's Alliance spent a year studying the issue that we're talking about today, not specifically on Uyghurs, but the violations, the persecution, even some of the genocide of women around the world. And over 12 months, we worked with a research team out of the UK and spoke with women and organizations like Campaign for Uyghurs that work with women across from 22 countries and 13 faith beliefs and ethnic groups. And the purpose of that was exactly what you're talking about today. A lot of the research has been done validating that persecution happens. And we were trying to determine who's working on it? What do they need on the ground? How do you move it forward? How do we take the body of knowledge over the last decade that groups have had, and how do we glean from that and do advocacy? And I thought that was appropriate today, particularly for the diaspora. So if we can go to the next slide, I want to set some context on, again, when women are persecuted in any setting, as far as their religion, it can be one or all of the things that create a compound vulnerability that make them different or nuanced from men. And so this includes everything I'm saying includes Uyghur women today. And so just quickly to set the context, if you have religious persecution, things that can compound, or what that means is build on top of it. You may have one, two, or all of these things exasperating that situation and making it different because we are women. So sometimes the cultural norms or the legal disparities in a country, which would certainly hold true in China, gender inequality, economic vulnerabilities, age vulnerability. Sometimes the youth and the elderly are the most vulnerable. Challenges of displacement, which is also those who are able to escape the camps. But whether you're talking the Rohingya, whether you're talking in Sudan, whether you're talking even in Nigeria now. And then political, ethnic, and tribal conflicts. Each one of these in and of themselves can create severe violations of human rights and women's rights. And when you have one or two, we call that compound vulnerability. So let's go to the next slide, please. So if we're looking at all the things that our two previous Uyghur speakers spoke about, you want to say, what leads to that? What hampers our efforts to you can't advocate, you can't change if you don't understand why and how it's happening beyond your personal story or experience. So we have three things. Before we look at this category, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but on the right, these are roadblocks from helping us that have created the situations, from helping you advocate or change it. So three things. You have mindset, systems, and structures in any country, and you have all three of these. What is a mindset that can create something? It is referred to a set of attitudes or beliefs that are held. We hold, they're held in that country. It's crucially important of the mindset, for instance, toward the Uyghur, because it affects everything that is being done, that they feel, that they think and experience. Secondly, you have systems. That's the processes or the methods that things work together. It's a network or a mechanism. And last, you have structure. That's the arrangement of a relationship of parts. So real quick, we have some categories. So the violations, the things that all the Uyghur women are experiencing, and we're seeing in many, again, countries and situations and communities, are you have things that hamper our ability to address is a lack of awareness. It's a lack of a gender awareness. It's a lack of what I showed you on the private slide. They're like, why are women different? And it's also a problem because of the narrative. Getting to the media is one thing, but when the media does it, there's not a narrative. There has not been a real narrative about Uyghur women, even though you've done stories until recently. There was just been a report that came out. They took data that was out there and they harvest that data and were able to report some cases, Uyghur human rights, on women. So even though we've heard your stories for years and they're happening, the media is not really talking about the situation of the women. They're talking about the one-off survivor within the larger narrative of Uyghur genocide. You have religion and culture. What are the cultural norms? What's the knowledge about Uyghurs? Do people understand them? Do they understand your ethnicity, your religious beliefs? Most often not. You have context, whether it was the pandemic, whether it's forced marriage that can create violations. Then you have the government. That's a system, that's legal. Collaboration, we're working in silos. So even though you have diaspora around the country in the West, in other countries, sometimes you're working in silos. You're not working together on common themes or campaigns. And that's a hindrance, a roadblock. Power structures. Women don't have access at the table. And I'm sure Anne's going to speak to this at times. They have stories. They have legitimate data. But someone else is telling our story. Often we don't have the opportunity to even with the survivor focus, have the access to bring them ourselves. Resourcing. Number one thing in the world, any research and data, any organization, from the largest NGO to the smallest entrepreneur we found, funding. There's a lack of philanthropic understanding, grant giving, or even regular donor. It takes some money, not a lot always, but money to do advocacy, to change systems, even when diaspora are working. And then the capacity building and training. I know Campaign for Uyghurs is one of the most laudable, credible NGOs out there in human rights that is doing some real on the ground in country with diaspora training. And then youth engagement. The unemployment is leading to increase vulnerabilities. And last, organizational activity. So all of these things, again, it sounds complicated, but we want to dissect it. You want to understand how are women persecuted, and then what are the roadblocks? You can have one or all of these. And unfortunately, Uyghur women have all of these. Okay, can we go to the next slide? The next one, please. So what we found were a couple key findings, and it's not like expert testimony, but what we wanted to know and say is for rights, especially women's rights, have been disadvantaged. So that's one of the findings. Another key finding is, again, as I said, having the power structure, having the access, having the organization to plug into. Diaspora is really critical here. When we talk about advocacy, what are we plugging into as a body that can then start working various ways to try to change this situation? If we can't change it at large, how can we change it for one person, one family, one community? Another key finding, as I talked about, were cultural and religious norms. Let's go to the next slide. A fourth key finding, as I said, was collaboration. We all say we want to collaborate. Our research shows we're really poor at it. All right. It's not for lack of intent, but sometimes it is where, going back to the funding, a lot of groups, particularly, and I don't know if I can't say it's always true for the Uyghurs, but we've seen it in every other population, because it's a cause and effect, because funding is so hard to get that we tend not to collaborate because we want to make sure we don't give up the ground we do have or the donor we do have, rather than finding the common thread. And let me say something, there are strength in numbers. That is not a cliche. So it is imperative that we work together. And then the last key finding is working with the empowerment is the training. Let's go to the next slide. I'm almost wrapping up. So today you're talking about changing culture. So all of those things we talked about, if we have all of those roadblocks, what does the diaspora do about it? What hampers it? we don't know where to start. Okay, we have our stories, we have data, but where do we start? Let's go to the next slide. Questions for the diaspora. Next slide, please, again. All right. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I have 2 slides and I'll quickly touch on. The main principle is do no harm. And there are several other principles about sensitivities, and particularly, I'm sure Anne will get into some of those when you're telling survivor stories and things of that nature. But if you are a diaspora, even if you are plugged into, let's say, Campaign for Uyghurs in a country, I know I've worked with you in several countries on some of your trainings. Even if you're part of that plugged in group, it's important to understand, why are we doing what we're doing? And what are some questions that maybe we don't know to ask? Questions such as, how can we use human rights to advocate better to protect Uyghur women? Do I need to start an organization, or is there one I can plug into? Do we need funding? And if so, who can teach me about that? How can we make sure no one's monitoring our communication as a diaspora, as a group, and our advocacy? And that's becoming more and more critical issue, as you all know. How do we get involved with the UN, or should we? What role does the UN play? What can we do to gather information about violation? What can we do in our home country versus in country? And I will say this, more than any other situation that I've seen in the last decade working with women and human rights, the Uyghur women and Uyghur diaspora are the most hamstrung on this issue. There is not a lot at times you can do in your home, your country of origin. And so you're trying to force change from outside. Can we go to the next slide and I'll wrap up? We have another slide, please. Okay. So my recommendation right now is, this isn't clinical. It's not like a report. It is to understand that the diaspora are powerful, but leveraging that in a way that may never eradicate it, the violations and harms, but that moves and makes sure each step is concrete, forward moving, and sustainable is really critical. And carefully be plugged into organizations like Campaign for Uyghurs or Uyghur Human Rights, and I know you work together. And the last thing I'll say is the recommendation, the bigger, what we're seeing, the biggest movement is the bigger the tent, you're not diluting your efforts, you're actually helping them. So we're seeing even the Uyghurs now that you're standing with Hong Kong, you're standing with Taiwan. At times that unity on certain elements of advocacy and global diplomacy is good. And so it's nuanced, but I would just leave you with incredible respect for the efforts that over many years, the way the diaspora of the Uyghurs has organized themselves, and how I would say, I wrote the history of international religious freedom, co-authored that, and of almost any other population, you have brought awareness, you have advocated, you have gotten laws, you are impacting international trade. But as you know, it is a long game. And so be patient and persistent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lou. You have brought in a ton of different threads on different institutions that we can work to strengthen. And I'd love to hear from the panelists on the relevancy on what they face into their day-to-day. And I am very excited also to build upon this and move to Anne Bashem, who will be speaking about the intersections between what Uyghur women are facing and the work that Anne sees every day as well. A bio of Anne. Anne Bashem is the CEO of Ascend Consulting, which is a human rights advocacy firm based in Washington, D.C. She is also the chair of the Interparliamentary Task Force on Human Trafficking. She has dedicated her personal and professional life to combating human trafficking and violence against women. She has served survivors from all over the world, helping them safely leave dangerous situations, navigate the legal system, and secure stable sources of income, stable housing, and restorative care. Anne, I'd love to give the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, it's an honor to be here today. I really am going to talk mostly about the intersection between this incredible crisis and human trafficking. So as Rashan had mentioned earlier, home should be the safest place in the world. You know, for so many people, we want it to be a place of joy and refuge. There's a universal sense that that is what home should be. However, unfortunately, because of the efforts of the CCP, many homes of Uyghur women specifically are changing. And so we know that there's an incredible intersection with forced labor. But one of the areas that has actually seen a dramatic uptick is forced marriage. So homes are now subject to surveillance. So it's not only affecting those who have been removed from their home, but now especially women within their home are under surveillance and control, and they are being forced increasingly into marriages against their will. So just to go back and to state a few facts on this issue, it started actually as early as 2014 when the Chinese government began to impose forced interethnic marriages on Uyghur women. And they did this under the guise of promoting unity and social stability. And then actually on August 25th of 2017, CCP officials in the region took these measures a step further, and they actually announced a plan called the Uyghur Han Marriage and Family Incentive Strategy. And that gave actually a monetary amount to Uyghurs and Han Chinese couples who intermarried. The policy marked the first time that the CCP explicitly proposed incentivizing this policy. Currently, over obviously 1 million members of the CCP have been incentivized and sent to marry or live with Uyghur women, over 1 million. These women are blackmailed, sexually assaulted, and coerced into marriage out of fear that if they refuse, they will be threatened with imprisonment or their relatives will be harmed. So I just want to share that this is a form of human trafficking. We don't talk about this type of human trafficking as much, but actually forced marriage accounts for 22 million people globally, 22 million currently. That is the estimate for those who are trapped in a forced marriage of some sort. I know not everyone on here is familiar with what human trafficking is. Sometimes it's confused with human smuggling, which has to do with immigration. I'm not talking about that. When I refer to human trafficking, the definition is the act of recruiting, transporting, obtaining a person for labor or sex through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. So that's really the key factor there is force, fraud, or coercion. Forced marriages among Uyghur women have some similarities to some of the other types of forced marriage, which usually involve one of the most common types is where parents feel coerced into selling their children, usually for economic reasons, into a forced marriage. And that is not what we're referring to here. So the distinct characteristics of this are, number one, the forced marriages are often driven primarily by this cultural campaign. So it's targeting the Uyghur people, and they are not often child brides. Sometimes they are child brides, but it doesn't have to be. The forced marriage of Uyghur women is also part of state-sponsored trafficking. That is what makes this crisis, if anything, so different. This is not just done by criminal networks or individuals. You know, a lot of human trafficking is done through advanced criminal networks. And with this, it is actually a form of state-sponsored terrorism and trafficking. It's facilitated or encouraged by the CCP government itself as part of the policies that are aimed at really assimilating or controlling the Uyghur people. And finally, it is part of an overall genocidal campaign. And it's part of this whole issue of forced labor and fear. And when fear is at the heart of something, that is the root of the control issues. So that's really what's at the heart of this. I could go on and on about this, but unfortunately, that is the biggest intersection right now that we see. And I will say the biggest thing with this whole crisis is that what we see happening with the Uyghur people impacts the entire rest of the world. So I deal with survivors of trafficking. I work on trafficking issues and policy issues here in the United States and then around the world. And I will tell you, that is what makes this the most different, is that this really touches everyone. I mean, as Rashan has said, the clothing that you're wearing right now could be made by her sister or someone else, because so much of our cotton is manufactured over there. And so really that's where I've focused mostly on the policies that can get at the root of that. And we'll talk about some of those in a little bit. But those are some of the primary intersections right there, specifically for women.
Thank you so much, Anne. And that will lead us to start our conversation on how we can strengthen the different institutions. There have been many different institutions that have come up within all of your remarks. And actually, Anne, since you have started talking about human trafficking and details about what's going on, I'd like to start the first question with you. How can Uyghur women who live in the United States um, use their power and experience to push for legal accountability to help Uyghurs who are living in East Turkestan?
Yeah.
And what are some challenges to doing that?
Well, the most important thing is to remember about public policy is that public policy is most impacted by public opinion. So laws change because oftentimes there's widespread public support for something. And just as a really quick example, here in the United States, for those who are from the United States, we had a big push shortly before COVID lockdowns because it was found that drinking straws, were getting dumped into the ocean and ending up in the noses of turtles and harming or even killing these turtles. So there was this widespread campaign. It was not a government policy, where a whole bunch of people said this is not acceptable, and they started a campaign just to stop drinking straws. It ended up changing laws within California, and the trend went across the country all the way here to Washington, D.C. My own teenage daughters would be out and their friends all had metal or alternative drinking straws if they were going to use them. And that is all because of public opinion changing. So what I say that because I think that was for turtles. We should care even more about human beings and the human suffering that is occurring over there, knowing that this is something that actually we can do something about. So often we hear about, things that we really have no control over, but with this we can do something. I would say the first thing that we can do is actually to change buying habits. It's really simple. Here in the United States, if you just watch even movies, actually a lot of movies show women especially, and they're in a different outfit in every single scene. And we just don't need that. We can have smaller closets. We can have what they call staple wardrobes. I know this is really small, but if this becomes the trend, and if this becomes something, we're actually going to reduce the amount of cotton that's used. We're going to start impacting some of the forced labor just by that. So I could go on with other things, but those are some really practical things that can start to change. And when they change within public opinion, it will start to spill over into more public policy changes as well.
Noted. Thank you. And I agree. Public opinion is so important. And so I want to direct the next question to Rashan. And how can you elaborate on the propaganda narratives about Uyghur women and that are being perpetuated by the CCP? And how can we bring what is happening into the larger conversation of women's rights to shift public opinion?
Actually, this is a great question. I was just reading one of the comments here, written by Al Patron, and he wouldn't give up. He wrote twice. If you don't mind, I'm just going to take a minute to address him, because this is, exactly the propaganda and the false narratives that the CCP is spreading about us, about Uyghur women. He wrote on the comment, he said, quote, "Didn't Abbas work in Guantanamo torturing Uyghurs," unquote. So this is the accusation mirrors the tactics employed by the CCP officials, like Zhao Lijuan first started, then repeated by Hu Xijin, and then all these Chinese trolls, and now people like him. I think he lives in Australia. I have seen him, commenting like that, and every time when I tweet something. So yes, I did provide translation services for the 22 Uyghurs wrongfully detained in Guantanamo, and they never face any torture in Guantanamo by anybody, not by me. I was just translating for them and helping them. I also worked with their defense attorneys to facilitate their resettlement to third countries while Beijing was asking for their repatriation for potential execution. So Al Patron, your false allegations only underscore the impact of my strong advocacy work. And it appears like, just like the CCP officials, you also fear the truth that I'm sharing with the world. So go tell your boss in Beijing that those attacks, those tactics only empowers me and fuels me with strength to fight harder. So now I address your question, Sabrina. So the birth rate dropped to 0%, some of the mostly Uyghurs populated areas. And the Chinese embassy to the United States tweeted on their official account that these forced sterilization and forced abortion policies liberated Uyghur women from becoming, quote unquote, baby making machines. Yeah, if you Google that, we will see the original tweet. So basically, they were congratulating their efforts. They were praising the forced abortion, forced sterilization efforts. And now they also praise the forced marriages and the inter-ethnic mixing, claiming that our way of life is backwarded and they are improving the population pool. This is eugenics. The Chinese government can control Uyghur women's ability to give birth in order to increase the density of the Han Chinese within occupied East Turkestan in our homeland. So this is an example of one of the most intricate ways a government can control women in order to serve their own ambitions of expansion and the colonization through this modern genocide. So it's time to make a concerted effort to add the plight of the Uyghur women into a larger discussion of women's rights. Women should have the freedom to choose their future. The conversation here is not intersectional. It's not complete without highlighting the Uyghur women and their right to have children and raise their kids in dignified conditions. It needs to be talked about in the mainstream media. We don't see the Uyghur issue being covered in mainstream media. It needs to be addressed in every conversation about women at every level of government and every platform. And the public sentiment on the issue needs to change. And it will only begin once people start talking about it more and giving it to the coverage it deserves.
Thank you, Rashan, and for calling out the trolls that we see. So there's so much to the narrative of the Uyghur women plight. And like Anne mentioned, like Rashan mentioned, the public sentiment needs to change, and media controls the public sentiment. So Lou, I'd like to pose this question to you. As a communications expert, how do you suggest we overcome the challenge in media coverage to ensure that what Uyghur women are facing comes into a global landscape, the global media landscape?
It's difficult. Let me just say the reason it can be done and it should be done. The difficulty comes from a lot of the mainstream media are limited and on their resources that they can reporters that they can address time to this issue. Secondly, you have, as you said, trolls and a lot of bots and a lot of false narratives out on social media. And then you have our AI that's seeding a lot of misinformation and trust. So basically, see it through the eyes, first of all, of if you're using not social media or digital media, but if you're using someone else's media, you want them to write a report about it, whether it is their blog, their corporate site, their newsletter, broadcast, radio, Voice of America, anything. Number one, you need to do the work for them. So you want a clarity and accuracy and being concise in your approach to them, and understand that it needs to fit into their world of what they cover. If they're an investigative reporter, obviously there's a lot to do here, and there's been a lot of investigative work. But you need to approach them understanding, is this something in an area they normally cover, human rights or China or women or all of the above? Secondly, what's the hook? What's new that you're bringing to them that they would want to explore, write about, or expound on? So that's really important for that piece. When it comes to digital or social media, you have about 5 to 7 seconds to get somebody's attention. So what is your message? How do you drill down something that's complex, that's wrong, that's emotion charged into 250 characters, into one picture? So understand, when you're using social media, you're trying to get someone's attention and make them curious, not necessarily make a point. You're trying to draw them into something deeper where they can explore, they can learn, they can educate themselves. You can try to change their opinion. So being aware of the type of media that you're trying to use, who is the audience for that, and what is your message, and how have you nuanced it for that medium, that media channel and that audience. And that's key, that's crucial. I would say that, again, being complimentary, the Uyghurs have done an exceptional job. I think probably early on you made some missteps, but the media coverage is not on Uyghur women, but on the Uyghur plight of the Uyghurs. There is a lot. It's gotten better. It's gotten more accurate. And that media can then be used in government to try to help inform the grassroots in countries to change laws, to create sanctions, to boycott, as Anne said, certain things. So the media is extremely powerful. And if there are a lot of people out there that can work with you on that, and Campaign for Uyghurs has done a great job, as well as Uyghur Human Rights. So just being careful that you can't do everything all in one story or one tweet, and you have to prioritize. What is it you're trying, the message you want to get across at this point in time? I would like to mention one thing, if I can, too. Someone put a question in the chat about the prior comment about how do we, I so can relate to the bigger tent. I can't get people to collaborate. How do we respond to people who won't collaborate with us? And it's very similar to the media comment I made, is trying to find one campaign, one element, one aspect of the broader issue, and seeing if they can agree on that, and then what can be done about it. Whether you're contributing data, whether one person is creating stories, one person's creating the mechanism of the contacts, one person's funding. So approaching groups, understanding that we won't agree on everything, we don't have to collaborate on everything, but is there one thing for this point in time that we can agree on to communicate and kind of reframe a narrative out there? And so it's baby steps. I've seen it happen. And I will tell you that for the Ford movement in general in the United States, which is part of the foreign policy, national security apparatus, freedom of religion or belief only move forward when they collaborated with human rights groups, and they don't play well together in the camps. Usually human rights groups can be advocating for women, FORB can be advocating for women, but do they work together? Very rarely, because there's so much that they see the world differently, rather than what is it that we can agree on to move forward. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. And I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit, moving to out of media and moving to Soraya, who is working with the diaspora community. Soraya, we have an idea about what is happening on the ground, but can you speak to the challenges that Uyghur women, children, and youth are facing within the United States?
Yes, thank you. First thing is common items that immigrants face, like settle and finding house, learning a new language like English, and being able to go to school, study while trying to taking care of the household and kids. We also have economic stress. So many of us work and go to the school and taking care of our kids. Second of all, top of that, we don't have any connection with any homeland. With our homeland, cannot contact our relatives and are constantly worrying about what they are going through. Then, so we feel this responsibility to go to the protests, speak up for people, and maintain our culture while in land with little sport. And on top of everything else, we are responsible for. I speak with many women in the community who have felt depressions, loss, and stress of all this on their shoulders. That's all the challenges we have. So we want to cope everything. So we have a lot of pressure in the diaspora. Uyghur woman. Thank you.
Thank you, Soraya. And this question I'd like to pose to both Luann and Anne as well, and if any other panelists have more to add of first, Luann, what is the work of Forbes Women's Alliance in empowering women to challenge these oppressive regimes? And how can different communities benefit from engaging with your organization?
Thank you. We're different. We have one mission, and that is to accelerate the work that is already being done by organizations like Campaign for Uyghurs, Uyghur Human Rights, in any group working within women and their belief system globally. And so what does that mean? You don't join us. We're not a membership group. We come along beside and behind you. So think about a high-tech accelerator in Silicon Valley. They kind of help people incubate, innovate, and they fund. That's exactly what we do. So make introductions quietly behind the scenes, sometimes for mentors, sometimes for training. We point people to resources. It's not a lack of training and goodwill out there. It's, again, the silos in different countries, even within country, not knowing the person. We're not necessarily going to see a website and call them up and say, hey, let's do this together. We can facilitate introductions and funding. So quietly funding a small amount of money, micro grants even can go a long way. So that is our entire purpose. We also conduct research and data and show people how to use that. Because let me say one thing, we're finding again that siloed advocacy efforts. You either are great at telling stories and survivor stories or diaspora stories, or you're a researcher, academic think tank, and you're doing all the data searching. Or you're an advocate and you know the mechanisms of government and the UN and the UNHCR, but how do you tie them together? You got to have all of those. So we try to be helpful in that aspect.
Thank you very much. And it's really addressing that need that is evident in a lot of communities and the Uyghur community as well, of limited resources. And thank you so much for the work that you do. And Anne, I'd like to pose a question to you as well, of building on your experience with survivors and people who are rebuilding their lives, a lot like Uyghur immigrants who are coming to the United States. What support services do you feel are essential for Uyghur women to have who have experienced these severe human rights abuses and displacement?
Yeah, well, this is one of the opportunities, I think, actually for faith communities to come around, as well as nonprofit organizations that serve survivors of trafficking or refugees specifically. So those support services would be very similar to a lot of refugees, but also the unique element to this is the high trauma that many have experienced. So I'm really encouraged, without getting into too much, because I know our time is limited here. There are so many great organizations out there that are really serving the needs specifically of refugees. That's what I found. So that's where I would start. The other thing is, I love what Luann said about collaboration. I think there needs to be more of that. And I think that is where the power of rebuilding and also ethical storytelling is. You know, instead of telling someone else's story, the world wants to hear what is actually happening. And so after some of that recovery has happened, linking arms with other organizations in a variety, you know, religious freedom groups, also anti-trafficking groups. Luann alluded to it, but I lead an anti-trafficking roundtable on Capitol Hill. Rashan has come many times. Also a task force on human trafficking internationally, and Rashan's part of that. But bringing in the lived experience, expertise of those who know what it's like to live under this oppressive regime, or their families are living under this oppressive regime. And so I think that's really at the heart of it, is once you're able to connect with some of those great support services that are available in certain Western countries, especially, really making sure that you are linking arms with other organizations and a variety of them, so that word spreads.
Thank you. And I love the emphasis on Farad Jalil's comment, and I feel like it's a common theme of a bigger tent and encouraging the collaboration within all these groups. And that is why we're having this call today, is because the single issue that we can all really come together on is the plight of Uyghur women. And Soraya, I'd like to move to you as we are finishing this up. And Rashan, I'd also like you to speak on this. Can you explain some successful partnerships between childcare institutions like Anacare and other organizations or government agencies that have been successful?
Okay, thank you. We have been fortunate engaging in numerous partnerships with local, state, and the federal entities, which have not only benefit our school and students, also significantly bolster support for Uyghur women. For instance, the EDVSO Foundation generous support has enabled us to maintain an almost entirely woman-led staff, fostering an environmental empowerment and representation. Moreover, collaboration with women-led organizations like Heritage Language Schools have facilitated connections with similar institutions, amplifying our collective impact, especially a tailored program such as SBA initiatives supporting women-owned business, have provided involved logistical assistance, streamlining administrative process and enabling smoother operations. Crucially, with our Uyghur community, partnership with organizations like Campaign for Uyghurs and the Uyghur American Association have been instrumental. This alliance, led by dynamic women, explain the resilience and the solidarity with our community. It's a testament to the unwavering dedication of remarkable women who continually advocate for our cause, uplift one another, and spearhead transformative movements. This act of resilience and mutual support underscores the provide role of Uyghur women and advancing our collective rights and aspirations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Soraya, and also for providing this resource to Uyghur women. And I'd like to end with discussing, Rashan, the advocacy work of Campaign for Uyghurs, and building upon Soraya, if you could describe the initiatives aimed at empowering Uyghur women in the diaspora.
Thank you. The points that Sreya made is extremely important, collaborating, working. And I just wanted to quickly highlight here the one initiative that we all, Campaign for Uyghurs and the UAA and UHRP, and we are all working together, is Uyghur Wellness Initiative that provides education resources for coping with grief and trauma, and the referrals to pro bono wellness professionals to support the Uyghur community who are dealing with the challenges that Sreya has mentioned earlier. And the Sreya is also a part of that, our Uyghur community here. And also I want to quickly use this time to ask for the Uyghur Policy Act S1252 to support that, because that is extremely important, and it is supposed to appointing an Uyghur special rapporteur and the special coordinator to the State Department to deal with many of the issues that we discussed here. So please, everyone, support this bill's passage at the Senate. Quickly, just to summarize what we are doing at the Campaign for Uyghurs, while we continuously work to highlight and put pressure on the CCP to shift their policies toward the Uyghur women. Campaign for Uyghurs focuses a lot on safeguarding and supporting Uyghur women in the diaspora. Especially we have this training workshops, advocacy workshops, both Luan and the Anne has been a part of. And we try to empower Uyghur women in diaspora to become strong advocates for our people back home and for themselves. So thank you so much for everyone. Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you so much. And I could pick all of your brains for much longer. And I'm so glad that this is a recorded call so I can look back, because all of the work you do and all of your insights really helps us at Campaign for Uyghurs fortify these institutions to support Uyghur women. And I can't thank you enough. If there are any audience questions, or if any of you have any closing remarks to end this call with, now would be the time. I know we're a little bit over.
Can I just quickly mention about the UN, since this is a part of the sideline event? The UN is being, thank you, being extremely disappointing for us, as China is one of the 5 permanent members in the UN Security Council and the second largest donor to the UN. They hold both soft and the hard economic power to sway crucial processes. And the most recent UPR, Universal Periodic Review on China, which we were in Geneva in January, and we were greatly outnumbered by the Chinese government-sponsored so-called NGOs in the UN. And also, if you look at it, out of 163 countries that requested to provide recommendations, over 120 countries either ignored China's genocidal policies against the Uyghurs, or they basically praised China. The Chinese government's war on humanity is belated, and it's a war on the women and the children, and it's a war on the religion and free thought, as well as it's a war on human dignity. And on top of it, who is the special envoy to represent women's rights in the UN? Peng Yuan, Xi Jinping's wife. So there's a real need to increase the manpower and the impact that we have at the UN to speak in favor of human rights as well as Uyghur women's rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing up that incredibly important point of view. In our global accountability framework, the Chinese government has power and influence that needs to be addressed. And like Rashawn mentioned, the Uyghur Policy Act, which needs to be passed in the Senate, will appoint more manpower in the UN, a special rapporteur for Uyghurs, as well as a special coordinator for Uyghurs. So everybody on this call, please support the Uyghur Policy Act in the Senate. And with that, I will conclude the session. Again, thank you all so much for your insights, and thank you all for viewing. Let's not stop this conversation here. Let's continue it offline and online again. I hope you all have an amazing day, afternoon, everywhere, because I'm sure people are streaming in from all around the world.
Thank you, everybody. Sabrina.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.